Do you ever feel pressure that you're the one tasked with fixing the ranking of Oklahoma being 50th in the nation?
That's a good question. Certainly, I feel some responsibility as an official in this role. I have a responsibility to do my part to whatever extent that I can to try to address the problem. So I take the role I take it very personally.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll be in this role until Governor Stitt terms out.
Mm-hmm.
And so I spent a lot of time thinking, there's not a lot of time left before Governor Stitt's term comes to an end. And so, every day I'm thinking, am I doing everything that I can and should be doing? Because time is tight, and we want to try to set our education system on a different trajectory. So yeah, I pretty much think about it every day.
When you saw those rankings that Oklahoma ranks close to last in education and only 26% of elementary students read at the grade level, how did you feel?
Well, I mean, it's an issue that I've been looking at for some time, so it's not something that's surprising to me or a new feeling, but I do feel very strongly that it's something we have to address it. So I think right now what we're trying to do is bolster our early literacy policy in the state to provide greater support and, quite frankly, greater energy early on, so that in kindergarten, first, second grade, that we're intervening when we have kids who are struggling with reading, that we're providing more training to teachers to help kids read so that we can work to address that problem.
In the turnaround team that Governor Stitt assembled, what does the conversations in that team look like?
Well, I would say Governor Stitt is really, I would say, laser focused
Mm-hmm.
on being able to put a foundation in place, or, well, for the remainder of his term, that we can put a foundation in place that will ensure long-term success for Oklahoma students. I
Mm-hmm.
think it's a big, it is a major priority for him, and of course, as a function of that, his team.
Mm-hmm.
With my being Secretary of Education, and also many of our other agency heads who
Mm-hmm.
are involved in the education system. So we have Sean Burridge, head of the Regents. We have Brent Haken, who
Mm-hmm.
is the director of Career Tech, and of course, State Superintendent
Mm-hmm.
Lyndall Fields. And I think all of those individuals are, their focus is on this issue. How do we get us turned around? And here's the thing. I think we can do it, and I think we're gonna do it. I think we're gonna start seeing gains because you can see that we have not only folks who are directly involved in education, not only our lawmakers, but lots of other stakeholders, business groups, different people across the state saying, "Hey, this is an issue, and we need to step in to address it." So we're seeing lots of different people come in and say, "How can I help? I want to be part of the solution." And so I do think we're going to start to see some gains, and if we can start to see some gains, we're going to capitalize on them and then start to be able to move our system forward.
Because you're here for so little time, like you mentioned, do you have hope for the future and the future governor and how they deal with the education problem?
Well, I definitely have a lot of hope for the future. Like
Mm-hmm.
I said, I think we're going to get this figured out because we have so many people stepping up right now. We even have young people like you saying, "Hey,
Mm-hmm.
let's do a 45-minute podcast all
Mm-hmm.
about education." So there's interest, there's desire, and I think we're starting to change. We're starting to change. I think we're putting in place the foundation that's going to change the trajectory. So I do think that that's there. I have no idea who the next governor will be. I'm not very good at not a very good prognosticator when it comes to predicting state elections.
Yeah.
So I don't know who that is going to be. It seems like there's maybe roughly about four or five people who may have a shot to get in. All of those individuals have made education a centerpiece of their platforms. So again, I'm hopeful that no matter who gets in as governor, that a lot of this energy, the foundation that we're putting in place, the different stakeholders that are coming into the system right now to help, I don't, no matter who's governor, I think that core is going to remain in place, and we'll be able to build on that in the years to come.
When your term ends, what do you plan on doing in the education system in Oklahoma? Do you plan to going back to research, or do you feel like you can still influence policy?
Well, I'll go back to my job as a education policy professor at the University of Oklahoma. I love OU,
Mm-hmm.
and OU has been just an incredible institution to be able to work for. I love our students and my colleagues there, and our administration. There's just so much to like about it, and we got a pretty good football team too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Um,
so
so
I've heard.
so yeah, so I'll definitely be heading back, and I run an education policy center
Mm-hmm.
out of OU, and that center specifically focuses on analysis of different education policies. So we put out a lot of research and briefs and work pretty closely with the legislature. So when they're looking at different policies, the center will do analyses of those policies so that we can provide data so that the legislature can make informed decisions. So I'll be heading back to my day job, and really quite frankly looking forward to not just research but also working more with students, because that's at heart I'm a teacher, and I love doing that.
Has your research primarily been focused on students, or do you think it should transition from focusing on teachers or surveys to focusing on the students?
Yeah, so a lot of the work that I've done over the years is pretty expansive in the policy area.
Mm-hmm.
So I look at academic interventions and their effects on student outcomes. I also look at student health and safety. Um, I've done, for example, quite a few studies of national studies of school gun violence and
Mm-hmm.
what are some of the factors associated with that. I've done a lot of work on family engagement. How do you get families involved? What are the effects of family engagement on student outcomes? So I do, I've done research on teachers. So for me, the big buckets are students and teachers and families, and I do a lot of policy work around those three pillars.
How has that research helped you with your policy today?
Well, it's helped me quite a bit, to be honest with
Mm-hmm.
you. So when we're looking at different policies, having studied a lot of these things over the years, I'm aware of not only what we found here in Oklahoma, but what also I'm also familiar with different bodies of research that have been generated nationally and across the country, and I try to leverage those when I can to be able to understand what we might need from a policy standpoint.
Mm-hmm.
But what I would tell you is research it can play an important role in policymaking, but it's not the only thing.
Mm-hmm.
There are other components of policymaking too. So some of it is relationships, some of it is the context. What works in Massachusetts might not work so well in Oklahoma because the culture is different, or the history is different, or the institutions are different. So research plays a role, but there's also context, there's relationship, and in some cases, I even think conventional wisdom is pretty valuable too. So there's a lot of factors that go into it.
Has that transition shocked you from researcher to the one actually making the policy?
Well, and we from the governor's office, we try to advance education policy, but ultimately it's the legislature that will run bills and move those bills up to the governor for signing. So in that sense, I'm not the one who is advancing bills out of the House and Senate. Instead, I'm trying to promote the governor's policy agenda from the governor's office. But I would say no surprises, because really I've been doing this from academia for a number of years now, so I'm pretty familiar with the legislative process and the different interacting factors that help to shape policy.
I think what you've made clear is that you're really passionate about the students in this as in your job. So if you could ask or survey students and ask them a question that could influence your policy or influence how you view the education system, what is one thing that you would ask the students in the Oklahoma system?
That's probably the best question anyone's asked me, and I've done a lot of interviews over the past few months. I think if there's one question I would ask students, I think what I would ask them is, what is your goal for yourself? Something along those lines. Where do you see yourself? Where do you see your life? What do you want for yourself in your life? Because I think the answers to that are going to vary, and that's
Mm-hmm.
great, because different people have different interests and passions. That's totally fine. But I think I would want to understand more about what our response is like to that question, because ultimately that would influence how it could influence how we put together the education system, or where we focus, or where we intervene. Because what I would like to see, I would hope, is that most of our students have very high expectations for themselves and for the future, and realize that if they put in the effort and put in the work, that really they can achieve anything they want to. That would be my main message for our students. You can do it, you can achieve, and you should reach as high as you possibly can. And I think, sometimes I'll see students that maybe don't have a ton of confidence in themselves, and
Hmm.
that's all they really need to
Hmm.
start to be able to pursue their full potential. And, when you see that, it's like, wow, you just need to kind of flip a switch on someone and they can just run.
What do you hope people in the legislature or the people actually passing the bills would recognize about the actual students that they're passing the bills about?
Well, I think what I would say is I think our legislators are very close to their communities.
Hmm.
Education is such a big issue at the Capitol. I mean, we're
Hmm.
talking about roughly half the state budget goes to education. So
Hmm.
all of our legislators have some kind of idea about education. As we're a rural state, a lot of our legislators come from rural areas, which means they're tied in with their local communities, they're tied in with their districts. So I often think our lawmakers come to the Capitol having a pretty good understanding of students and communities and schools.
Would you say it starts with the teachers, or would you say it starts with the students?
That's a really
Yeah.
good question. I would say this. That's a fantastic question. I would say ultimately, at the end of the day, each individual student is ultimately responsible, is most importantly, I think, has a lot of agency and responsibility for what their outcomes are going to be.
Hmm.
Now, certainly some schools, some communities provide better educational opportunities than others. But I would say at the very end of the day, the work that you as an individual student put in, the opportunities that you seek out, the effort that you put in, that is going to bear fruit every single time. Even if you're in a district maybe that doesn't have great resources or maybe has some challenges with academic performance, there are still students there who work their tails off and make it and do quite well. So I often put a lot of onus on the individual because I see so many individual success stories where people just beat the odds all the time. The next thing, though, after that, I would say it's teaching,
Hmm.
high quality teaching. So, the most important resource that we have in our education system is our teachers. So, all the other stuff, guidance counselors, principals, the football stadium, all that sort of, when you look at the research on this, all that sort of pales in comparison to the importance of the classroom teacher. So, a really strong classroom teacher is going to be able to drive student outcomes in lots of different areas. And that's a challenge we have right now in Oklahoma is that we don't have very strong teacher labor markets. Fewer and fewer people are deciding to want to go into teaching. So that's putting pressure on our schools because they have teaching positions to fill and fewer applicants to fill them with. So what we're working on at the state level is how can we get additional training for our current teachers who maybe have less training than what we would like. We're working with our local universities to create programs to be able to get teachers on a pathway and get them more training so that they can be more effective with their students. But then what we're also trying to do is connect with the broader public on the teaching profession because there's a story out there that goes something like this. Why would you ever want to be a teacher?
Hmm.
Um, it doesn't pay well. The students are uncontrollable. The parents are even worse. Communities don't support you. Why would you ever want to be a teacher? But the reality is, and I'm sitting here with you.
Hmm.
We had a chance to talk.
Hmm.
Um, this is an incredible opportunity to be able to work
Yeah.
with young people like you. And I think when it comes to teaching, there's lots of jobs you can do in life, and there's lots of paths you can take. But with teaching, you can have an impact on every single day on the job. Every single day, what you do matters. So that's an incredible thing. And I know of many teachers who love their communities and love their students, and so that other side, we need to tell that story much more in Oklahoma. So I've I am launching a campaign that we're calling Teaching in Oklahoma.
Hmm.
And what I'm doing is going around the state, going into schools and talking to teachers and having teachers and their students tell some of these stories because there is a lot of great stuff going on. And I think what we need to do is to bring some balance to what we're doing, to say, yeah, there's some challenges.
Hmm.
There are some students who have some behavioral issues that need to be addressed, and other types of issues. But there's also some incredible things. And a young person who's considering the teaching profession should know about this. Because again, I'm not sure there's too many, there's some jobs where you can have an impact out there, but certainly teaching has got to be right at the top of that list.
Do you do you think simply raising teachers' pay can solve that problem? And can you go a little further and explain your campaign and how you plan to get more Oklahoma teachers?
Well, yeah. So with the campaign we're doing, so we're running the interviews. It's going to be a social media campaign,
Hmm.
and the goal is to reach as many young people and also the broader public across Oklahoma. So on an ongoing basis, we'll be hopefully engaged on Instagram
Yeah.
and other social media platforms that younger people use. You guys still use Instagram,
Oh
right?
yeah.
Oh
Okay, all right.
yeah.
I always find whenever I ask, I'm like maybe 2 years outdated, but
Go on
okay. So
MySpace.
okay, so I'll have to consult you. I'll have to consult you later, Colton.
Okay.
But so that I think is one thing we're going to try to do. And as far as pay is concerned,
Mhm.
um, I do think that finding ways of compensating high performing teachers for the work that they do is really important. Whether that's an across the board salary increase for teachers, or also differentiating pay, so that if you have high performing teachers, that they're rewarded for the hard work that they're doing, or teachers who maybe work in schools that have greater challenges. So we have some schools where academic performance isn't so great, and so there's a lot of work to do there. And I would be in favor of paying teachers more who want to
Mhm.
go into those places that have greater educational needs, and pay them more to work in those environments as a recruitment strategy, and also
Mhm.
retention for that matter.
Mhm.
How do you think we could get more teachers or people involved in being or becoming teachers?
How do we get more?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think these two that Colton hit on. So
Mhm.
one, I think compensation does matter, and then finding ways of maybe differentiating compensation for folks who would like to, if they want to work in a school that has greater needs, or they're a high performing individual, that we're rewarding them, so we're keeping our best teachers in the classroom. I think that's something. And then I also just think I think we've got some work to do to change perceptions of the teaching profession, because as I mentioned, I think that other positive side of the profession, we don't talk about that enough. And a lot of what you see in social media or on the news, when you do hear about teaching, it tends to be a very negative story. And so when I'm in schools and when I'm talking with teachers and meeting with students, it's very optimistic. And you see those great stories. When I'm outside of schools and communicating with the broader public across Oklahoma, it's a totally different perception. And so we got to try to bridge that a little bit. I'm hoping to do it through this social
Mhm.
media campaign, but maybe
Yeah.
you guys could probably help me out with
Yeah.
this.
We probably could, to be honest.
All right.
But
Well,
um, going back to the teachers, I want to ask you, do you view the teaching profession as similar to how a lawyer is or how a doctor is? And do you think we should build pathways similar to how doctors or lawyers go to be doctors and lawyers to being a teacher?
well, I don't know. I mean, oftentimes people make those comparisons that
Mhm.
we should treat the teaching profession as if they were doctors or lawyers, and
Mhm.
there may be some elements of truth in that. But I would say, look, teaching is teaching,
Mhm.
and it has its own distinguishing and unique features to it, and probably needs to be treated as such, I would
Mhm.
argue. So I do think what we have to start doing is thinking about the training of teachers, not just in traditional ways, but also in non-traditional ways.
Mhm.
So the way that we've tended to do it in this country is we say, okay, you want to be a teacher? Well, you're going to go to the University of Oklahoma. You're going to get into a 4-year program, and then you're going to have a 30, 40-year career in teaching. Well, when I meet with young people and undergraduate
Mhm.
students, they don't really think about careers like that too often. I mean, that's more of the exception than the rule. So they're thinking, hey, I might major in one thing, or I might minor in a couple of different things. I might like to be a teacher. Maybe I might teach for 5 or 10 years, and then I might go do something else. And maybe I'll come back to it at a later date. But they think about careers in much more dynamic ways than I think previous generations do. So I think we need to respond to that new environment so that we're creating more flexible pathways that are still rigorous, still high quality, but allow for young people to, if you want to be a business major, that maybe you can also get a minor in teaching as you're doing your business route. So if you decide, hey, you get in the business world, get into corporate America, and you realize, gosh, this is not what I expected, you'd have a very streamlined and easy way of going into teaching because you got that minor in education in your back pocket.
I think people view teaching as like a last resort because I've heard stories of like engineers and they couldn't get a job. And then their professor tells them if you can't get a job, you can get a job as a teacher because they couldn't get a job in their field. So they have to get a job, end up teaching the field. How do you plan on fixing viewing teaching as a last resort job?
Yeah, well, again, I think it goes back to, I would say the story you just described is
Hmm.
really a misconception of what
Hmm.
teaching is and can be. So I think we need to kind of beat that back a little bit. Um, and also stop talking about it as if it is a last resort. Because I think for a lot, I think what you'll find if you talk to Oklahoma's teachers and get out and talk to the majority of our teachers, it's not a last resort for them. In For this Teaching Oklahoma campaign that I just mentioned to you all, um, I meet teachers who this was their first option.
Hmm.
And I asked them, is there anything else you'd rather do? And they say, no, I can think of nothing else I'd rather do. I get so much out of this. And so, yeah, I think that's a misconception, and we need to do some work there to change that. Some of it's just changing public perceptions by showing more of the reality on the ground.
Were you originally a teacher or a professor?
Yeah, so I have been a teacher
Hmm.
in K-12, but most of my career has been in higher education. So pretty much all of my teaching experience comes from being a professor. I've worked with both undergrads and graduate students. Right now at the University of Oklahoma, I primarily work with graduate students in a college of education. So many of my students are current teachers.
Hmm.
Some of them are looking to become principals or superintendents or administrators. Others are looking just to improve their teaching craft, but most of who I work with today at the university level are graduate students, so they're adults.
What are some values you see in your graduate students?
Well, I mean, they're going to university. They already have a job, and they're
Hmm.
looking to advance their careers and advance their skill sets and knowledge. And that's not easy because they'll work a full day,
Hmm.
and then they either travel to campus, or in some cases, if it's an online course, they'll get online. But after a full day of work, they're spending their evenings in a 3 hour class, and then those graduate classes aren't easy. So they're reading, they're writing papers alongside all of their other responsibilities. So what impresses me about that group of people is their work ethic and their commitment to education.
So would you say they're more passionate rather than just focused on doing this graduate program to get a better salary?
I think, certainly there's folks who are looking to improve their career prospects, and
Hmm.
that might mean a better salary. So that certainly exists. But I think that doesn't seem to be the primary driving force for a lot of my students. A lot of them are just they love education, and maybe they're at that place where, hey, I've been a teacher for 10 years, I want to take the next step now in administration, and so that's what they're deciding to do.
What are some things those in educational leadership, like superintendents or principals, should have instilled in them to have a positive benefit on the school they manage?
What should superintendents and other school
Or
leaders be
people in
thinking about?
educational leadership?
Yeah, well, that is a really good question. I would say at the end of the day, a really good leader, I think it's really simple.
Hmm.
Well, at least my framework is really simple. I think it's fostering a loving and supportive culture, attention to detail with your initiatives, and um, an anticipation of problems that might occur. So I kind of operate with those three very basic principles in mind, and a lot of other stuff I think can flow from that. So I use a very simple framework. Um, but a really good superintendent understands the importance of high expectations, high standards for students, for teachers, for the school community. A good school leader also understands that in order to be able to hold folks accountable for high expectations, you have to be out there building relationships and you have to be doing the work yourself. So I think those two things, high expectations for academic outcomes and relationships, sort of go hand in glove. And I think when you look at some of our great leaders across the state, they're really good at that. They're beloved by their communities, but they expect people to do the work too.
So how important is the teacher-student relationship?
In what regard?
Um,
For academics or
for
just for the student experience?
in general, like in the how teachers like manage their students.
Yeah, I mean,
And I want to go back to the culture question because that's kind of if a principal is really involved in the school, I find there's a lot of it shows passion, it shows they care about their students, and that really helps motivate, I think, students wanting to get more active in school culture. So how important do you think school culture is and this principal student relationship?
yeah, and relationships among staff and students and teachers and
Yeah.
staff are part of the umbrella of positive school culture. I would say
Hmm.
they're a significant component of positive school culture are those relationships. So I do think the teacher to student relationship is enormously important.
Hmm.
Because I think if a student knows that, hey, the teacher cares about me, or the
Hmm.
teacher has high expectations for me, or my teacher sees something in me that I don't see in myself, that has incredible knock on effects and will drive students to want to achieve at levels that they hadn't thought to achieve at. And so, I would highlight that particular relationship as absolutely critical. Now, for a principal, most students will have less
Hmm.
interaction with the principal, which is typical and to be expected. But I would think where a principal plays a really important role in fostering relationships is with the teaching staff,
Hmm.
supporting the teaching staff, being an instructional leader, and recruiting and retaining high quality teachers because they're the ones who are going to be driving student success at the end of the day.
How do they deal? How do you plan on dealing with teachers that have to deal with the student that just doesn't care?
How do you intervene with teachers to get them to motivate students who don't care?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean that's a challenge. I think one of the things that I think you can do is figure out what the students' actual interests are. I think that's one way you can motivate lots of students. And we're here at a career tech,
Hmm.
so no better place to underscore that issue because I think you find a lot of kids. I'm a firm believer that K through 8, your academic skills should be strong. Everyone should really have strong, especially math, reading and writing skills. But as you get up into high school, especially your second year of high school, that provides an opportunity to tailor more. And I think that's where student interests become important. So if you have a student who's interested in being a mechanic or more interested in welding and maybe less interested in calculus, well, the way you motivate that student is to provide some of those opportunities. So I do think our career tech system, our 29 career techs here in Oklahoma, play an instrumental role in motivating students who have maybe interests in high demands trade sector and are less suited to the typical academic. They're maybe less interested in the typical academic route, but can have a great life and a successful career by getting trained up in a high skills trade. So I think that's one strategy.
There are many students who are starting to become homeschooled or online. Do you have a plan on how to reach those students in particular?
Yeah, well, I would first distinguish between homeschooled and online.
Mhm.
So I know the two get conflated a lot of times. But I consider them to be very different models of education. I see homeschooling primarily as parent directed education,
Mhm.
where the parent is providing at least the majority of the education to the child.
Mhm.
Whereas full-time virtual school, a child will get their education primarily from the online format. I think there's some examples of when homeschooling is delivered. I think there's some cases around the state where homeschool families do a fine job with their kids and getting them prepared for college. I think there are some other cases that sometimes come to light where you have maybe individual families that use the regulatory umbrella of homeschooling and don't do much homeschooling, and so they sometimes get mixed in as homeschoolers. And I'm not really sure they're doing a whole lot of education, but I think the vast majority of people who are homeschooling their kids in Oklahoma care about their children's education, and from what I can tell, do a very fine job. Full-time online education, I have to tell you, I'm skeptical about it for lots of different students. I think that what we've seen is when you look at the academic outcomes on full-time virtual education, they're not very good at all. And I've studied it in many different ways, cut the data, looked at different types of student groups, high performing, low performing students. Doesn't really matter which student group you look at. Full-time virtual school academic outcomes are just not great for students. I do think there's a place for it though, because I think a lot of kids will go into full-time virtual if there's been, for example, a family disruption. Maybe there's a divorce in the family, and so parents move, and so virtual provides an opportunity for that student to be able to adjust to current circumstances if they're maybe going back and forth between homes. Sometimes kids, they may have a long-term illness or they're sick, and so just going to school is something they can't do, and so they end up going into full-time virtual. And so I do think there's some opportunities and there's some rationale for having it, but I think we need to be cautious about the use of it for the vast majority of our students.